Hello and welcome to hopefully a pretty short, but probably not very short, look at storyboards and table view controllers. This is my first screencast ever, so I totally claim ignorance if this doesn't go well. For today we'll be making an app. Hopefully it's actually somewhat useful. I've got a demo to show you first. It's a to-do list app, which I think is kind of useful. Here's our main screen here. You can see it's a table view with nothing really in it. We can add a new task. Say, get milk. So we can see it's been added to the main screen here. We can add a couple more. Go to the store. Buy an iPhone. And you can see that we can actually zoom into any, or kind of drill down into any one of these. Make changes to it. Those changes will be reflected on the main page. You can also mark them as done, which is an on-off switch, but it's the best we've got. And this will gray the task out on the main screen. Do that for multiple tasks. And then towards the end we'll get into a couple kind of fancy features. We can swipe to go into delete mode, or we can delete an object. Let's make another one so we can show reordering. Into program. We can click the edit button here and reorder the list or delete things from the list. Click the edit button again to finish. And that's the app we'll be making today. So without further ado, let's get started. Open up Xcode here. Making a new project. Now, since we'll be using storyboards, we want to pick the single view application for our template project, which might seem kind of unintuitive. This is because it gives us a storyboard by default. We will obviously have more than one view, but this is just the template it falls under. Let's call our product things to do. And our company name is edu.roseholman, which is, backwards, almost reverse name lookup of Rose Holman. I'll use a class prefix of RH. You can change this to whatever on earth you want. Important to check is the use storyboard here, and we're going to use automatic ref counting. I'll be doing it for iPhone. You can do iPad if you want. iPhone just a little bit easier to work with because the screen interfaces are so much smaller. Next here, pick a place to put this. Looks like I've already made a folder for that, so I'll make a new one. Alright, I will be using a local Git repository for this project. That's always handy. Kind of free version control. Alright, and here we are. Alright, so here is our default template. You can see we've got an app delegate here. This is standard stuff. And we've also got a view controller, but we don't have any zip files. What we actually have instead is a storyboard file, as you would guess. This storyboard file actually contains basically the contents of all of our zip files. You can see right now there's just a view controller with an arrow pointed to it. Go ahead and run the app just to see what it does right off the bat. Give it a second to compile. And you can see it's just a white screen. So let's take another look at the storyboard. Let me get some of this stuff out of the way here. So basically, the storyboard files are like a combination of zip files with the flows, and the official name is segues between them. This arrow that we see at the very left side of the screen is the initial flow of the program, kind of like a state diagram. So right now we've got a view controller. Most of the time you will just go ahead and populate this default one, but we actually need something pretty specific. We need a table view controller, because we'll be using table views for most everything in here. So I'll search down here for table view controller, drag it out here. This is because that main screen is that list of tasks. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and just delete the first view controller, select my new table view controller, And right here you can see initial scene is initial view controller. I'll go ahead and check that, and you'll see that arrow up here right there. So now this table view controller is our default view. Go ahead and run it. Not terribly exciting, but we should be able to see that. See, there it is. We've got a list now, and there's nothing in it, obviously. What we really want, though, is to be able to put a navigation controller around this, because we will need to transition from the main view of all the tasks into the details of an individual task. There's a really easy way to do this, which is really slick. In Xcode 4.2 this is, I believe. Yep. Up here in the editor menu, there's an Embed In submenu. You can click Embed In Navigation Controller. This will automatically stick in a navigation controller with a really sweet little animation there. Because this table view is now contained, you can see this arrow represents that containment. Because this is now contained in this navigation controller, it automatically sticks in this navigation bar at the top. So we can now say tasks, give it a title. We can run it again, and we'll see that this has taken nicely. Tasks. Perfect. So here we see the actual table view. There's this prototype cells area. We'll get to that a little bit later. That's a slightly more complicated topic. We're going to switch the type to static cells, which just lets us define cells as however we want. We're going to go ahead and just delete 2 of them here. This last one we'll click and set its style to basic. Give it a title. Let's say a fake task. And we're doing this just so we can have something in this table view, so that we can kind of work without having to actually have the items populated yet. You see that when we run this, it looks just as we'd expect it to. Now we want to be able to branch off into a couple of different view controllers. We want to be able to, 1, add, and 2, edit any task. So we'll make new table view controllers for each of those. It turns out they each have significantly different controls, even though they look a little bit the same. It's nice because you can actually zoom out in this view and arrange them nicely like this. I'll kind of align it so any OCD viewers don't have a heart attack. Alright. Zoom back in. You have to be zoomed in. You can hit the equals button actually here to zoom to the proper zoom level. So we've got, we'll let this view controller be the adding view controller, we'll let this one be the editing view controller. Now if you remember from the demo, to get to the add view controller, we had a button up here in the navigation bar. That is a bar button items. We'll just go ahead and grab that here and add it right there. Its style will be bordered. Its identifier, we'll just click add here and that automatically puts the plus in there and everything. No problem, very easy. And then to actually hook these up, you can see you've already got a connection here for containment, but we want a transition, or as Xcode now calls it, a segue for each of these. So the way we do that is the same way we hook up ivars. We hold down the control key and drag from the button to the view controller that it will cause to appear. And we'll see we've got some options here. Storyboard segues. We can push, we can modal, and we can custom. Push is what happens in a navigation view controller, where the next view controller is sort of pushed onto the stack, and it automatically creates the back button and everything. That's not exactly what we want here. We want this to sort of pop over the whole application, and that's actually called modal. And oops, I clicked the wrong one there. You can see it's easy to switch. And you can see the icon here kind of indicates which of those it is. Now to cause this editing view controller to appear, we actually want the first one on that list, which is the push segue. And instead of dragging from the button, this time we'll drag from this table view cell. We'll use push right there. And you can see it's got a different icon. So this is the navigation of our app actually all the way done, which is pretty cool because we still haven't written a line of code. Let's go ahead and run it to see what it does. And you'll see there's a pretty funny bug right now. Oops. You can actually click on the task now, and you can see it automatically adds in this disclosure indicator. So you can click on that and be able to back right back out. And then if we click the plus button, we'll see that, and you can barely see it because it looks almost the same as the table view underneath, but that the new table view controller slid up from the bottom of the screen to the top. But I mean, the problem is now we're kind of stuck here, so we've got to go ahead and just stop the run right now. You'll also notice that because this editing view controller is being pushed into our existing navigation view controller, it gets this navigation bar, which is great. We can just type in our title right there, no sweat. The problem is we also want one of them here, so we can say, add task and give it some buttons. Because this is a table view controller, which we're using that so we can have these fancy controls for defining prototype and static cells. Because it's this type of controller, we can't actually edit what the view is. So we'll have to actually embed this in a navigation controller just for the sake of having that bar at the top, which is kind of kludgy, but it works just fine. So we'll go ahead and click that editor, embed in navigation controller again. You'll see it'll create a navigation controller, and now our table view controller has a bar at the top. And again, we just put that there so we can have this bar at the top. There will never be anything else inside this navigation controller, but this is the sort of simplest way to do that. Now we can add some of the controls. We've got some bar button items ready to go here. Put one on each side of the add task view controller. This one will say cancel, and this one will say done. The done will have a style of done, which makes it a little bit bluer. That makes it more true to some of the other iOS apps. Edit task won't have any buttons at the top, but both of these will have some controls on the inside. The reason we made these, and I guess this is kind of the point of all of this, the reason we made these table view controllers is because with these static cells that we're able to create, we can actually make some really nice data entry forms that look really nice and look a lot like, say, the Contacts app and the rest of iOS without us having to work too hard. So I'll show you how to do it. It's kind of funny the first time you do it, but I'm a really big fan of it. Click right here on this prototype cells, which actually selects the whole table view. Again, we're not going to be using those prototypes right this second, so we'll actually switch that to static cells, which again just lets us do whatever you want with this table view. So what we'll do next is switch the style from plain to grouped, and you can already probably see it looking more and more like the Contacts application. Go ahead and delete two of these. This screen is just going to have a name field that people can type in. So looks like if we click right in between the cell and the top, we can grab the section. We'll give it a header that says name. And you can see we got that pretty little label there. Click on the cell itself. Style is custom. You saw before that we can kind of set these various different styles, which look really nice. But what we want is one you can actually type in. So we'll leave it as custom, which lets it be blank. Then we can actually go down here and grab a text field and drop it right inside of this table view cell. We'll use the blue guidelines to make it fit properly. And then right here in the border style, we'll click the dotted line to make it disappear completely. So now we've got actually a really nice looking user interface. I'll show you what it looks like. The buttons still don't do anything, so we still will be stuck once we click the add button. We can see it's just this really nice looking interface. The buttons are clickable, obviously, but they don't do anything. And you can click right here in the center and be able to type. So, but again, the buttons don't do anything, so we have to just kill the app. We're going to do the exact same thing with the edit task screen, except instead of just having a name field, we'll have a name and the ability to mark the task as done. So we'll switch it to grouped again. We'll actually give it two sections this time. The first section will have a header that says name, and the second section will have no header at all. we'll make it so there's just one cell in each of them. So here is our name cell. We'll do the exact same thing where we just kind of lodge this text field right in the table view cell. Make it invisible just like we did before. And then for the done cell, grab a label and just kind of get it right in there. Make it say done. And then grab a switch, stick against the other side. And mute myself there. Make sure these are right in the middle so we don't, again, cause some poor OCD kid to have a heart attack. There, we'll line them up with their center lines. Alright, that looks alright. Go ahead and run it, and you should be able to see that our edit screen looks great now too. See what we can type right here. And because of the way we set this up, most of the stuff sticks to the top of the screen, so the keyboard doesn't actually cover up any of our controls. We don't have to do anything funny as far as organizing that. Switch the done on and off, go back to the task screen. So the really cool thing about storyboards is so far we have not written a line of code, and that's really impressive, I think. And we've also kind of defined at a high level how our app will function. I mean, a new developer can come in and look at this and kind of see how the whole thing works. These are both very valuable things. I'll go ahead and show the side pane here because now we actually do need to write a little bit of code. I guess the first thing we really need to do is define what a task actually is. We've talked about model view controller previously in the course, so that's exactly what we need to do here. We'll make a new Objective-C class. We'll call it RH task. Remember, we use the RH prefix because we picked it, but we always prefix our things. That way, if someone else ever uses our code, it'll be very easy to tell their tasks apart from our tasks, and as long as they use a different two-letter prefix. Go ahead and just create it in our project. We're going to make this a really simple model implementation. There's no need to make it too complex. Give it a couple properties here. So it'll have one, a string that's its name, and two, a boolean that is whether or not it's done. We'll also give it an initializer, init with name, and done. Alright, we'll jump over to the implementation file and synthesize both the name, and we'll use the shortcut for creating the named ivars here. Synthesize done. And then we'll create our basic initializer. So we'll do the standard thing of self equals super init. Check to make sure self actually got created, which is just a check. Set our two properties. Then return, and that's it. Our model is done. This is all we need. But having it all wrapped up like this makes it really nice because we can just pass them around now. I should see those warnings go away. Yep. Alright. The next step is to actually start talking about displaying tasks in our main table view here. We'll go ahead and select it, and actually we can't actually select the table view right now, so we'll have to show this sidebar here. We can see from the hierarchy that right there is our table view. So we'll select that and switch its content back to dynamic prototypes. So now is about the time we need to talk about what the prototypes actually mean. So instead of having static cells here, the content of the table will be generated by our code. So obviously we can't show anything here because we don't know what's going to be there, but what we can show is our prototype cells, which are table view cells that have a specific styling already associated with them, so that we can very easily reuse them, just setting their content to be whatever we want it to be. So we'll actually have two prototype cells here. You can see from the demo that we had a typical task has black text and a done task has gray text, so we'll do exactly that. We'll set the style of both of them to basic. And it doesn't matter that it says title right there. That text will be replaced. Here we will set the, actually double click on that label in the middle and set the text color to light gray. Now we need some way of uniquely identifying these, so if we click on any one of them, we'll see that at the top here we have a reuse identifier to specify. So we will call this type of table cell the not done task cell, and we will call our second one done task cell. Now, it'll make it easy for us to remember later. It really doesn't matter what you type there. I like to put cell at the end just in case it appears elsewhere in the code. I can know what it means. So now we need to actually write some code for this view controller, and unfortunately we don't really have anywhere to write it right now. So what we need to do is actually make an implementation for this view controller. So we'll make a new UI view controller subclass. You can see usually here that it's UI view controller is pre-populated, but like you can see from what I already had, we actually want a UI table view controller because that's what we are subclassing here. And we'll call that RH task list view controller. This with zib for user interface might be checked already. We want to uncheck that because again, we're not actually using zibs here. All of our stuff belongs in the storyboard. Also, we don't want targeted for iPad to be checked either because this is an iPhone app. Click next here and actually create our task list view controller, and you can see actually a ton of stuff gets created here. This is because not only is this a view controller, but it also serves as the delegate and data source to protocols that have to be implemented for this table view. So it automatically populates some of the methods that need to be implemented there, which is nice. It just means there's tons of stuff to look at first. You can see it sticks two warnings in here for two things that you really need to implement. We'll come back to those in a second. First, let's talk about what we actually need to have present here. The biggest thing is we actually want a list of tasks. Makes sense, right? So we'll have a property on our task list view controller, non-atomic and strong. And it will be a mutable array because we will be changing its contents, reordering them, adding to them, deleting them, whatever. And we'll just call that tasks. Go ahead and jump over and synthesize that. And then when the view did load, we'll go ahead and create one. And we'll just call the default initializer on that. So then we'll have a task as soon as the view loads, or a list of tasks, which will obviously be empty at this point. Now let's actually talk about how we're going to do these table view methods. So you can see here they've made a mark for table view data source. So this is the stuff that actually defines where the table gets its data. So this method we have to implement number of sections in table view. Well, honestly, everything's always in the same section, so this is always 1 no matter what. So that's a very easy one to implement. Return 1. Here we've got number of rows in section, and that gives you a section. Since we always have the same section, we don't actually have to care about that. We just need the number of rows because this is actually how many table view cells it's going to render. So we will actually return self.tasks.count. However many tasks are actually in our current task list is how many cells we want. Makes sense. Now here's kind of the complex one. Cell for row at index path. Here we get past an NS index path, which is a very generic way of representing paths through tables and through sections of things. It's basically a list of numbers. So if you have a table view, it might be a number for a section and a number for a row. And actually, this one, I don't know if it'll show it here, is actually No, it doesn't show it here. What we actually get past here is a category on NSIndexPath that has a row and section method. So even though this is a very generic thing for browsing any kind of hierarchical data, we can refer to its section and row because that's all it'll ever be for our table view. But since we only care about the row here because everything's in the same section, this is essentially a wrapper for a number of what row we're looking at. But what this method actually does is we create a Uitableviewcell, which is as you guessed, a table view cell that will actually get dropped into the view. So it is actually a view that we are creating here. So let's look at what actually happens already. First, we've got a static NS string called cell identifier, and this is actually what we use to figure out what type of cell we're going to create. It turns out it's a lot faster to just reuse existing cells if we've already got them created. Say there's 10 million things in the list and someone's scrolling, we can actually reuse the cells as they go off screen. Just put them at the bottom of the table view and change their contents. So the way we do that, and the way the programmer does that, is first we've got a call to our table view called DQ reusable cell with identifier. Basically that says, hey table view, if you have a cell ready to go, ready to get rid of, that has a cell identifier of cell, go ahead and give that to me. This can return nil, so the next thing we do is check to see if that's nil. If it is, we go ahead and create our own Uitableviewcell. So we allocate and then we emit it with a style, and actually this corresponds directly to that drop-down menu where we could pick default or detail. So we emit it with a style and then we give it a reuse identifier, and you can see we give it cell identifier just like we decided up here. At this point, here in the code, cell is an actual Uitableviewcell object, so all we need to do is set its text or set anything else that we want to set about it and then return it. So if this is new to you, it's okay. It's kind of a confusing topic, but it really is kind of a cool strategy and not too hard to implement, especially since they already kind of do it for you. So the first thing we'll do is change cell to our actual cell identifier, which if I remember right was not done task cell. And by using this cell identifier, we actually get to use the cells that we defined in our storyboard. So, and I think this actually will not get called because by using a cell identifier that we defined in our storyboard, the styling and everything will automatically get applied to it. So either this does get called and the styling gets applied in the background, or this never gets called and this always returns not nil. Anyway, once we actually have our cell, what we need to do is set the text of the cell, because that's really all that goes there. So to do that, what we actually need to do is figure out what task we're dealing with. So we'll say RH task, and actually we need to import RH task. And we'll call this current task equals, and we'll just retrieve from our tasks the object at index, and we're going to actually use the index path that we're passed dot row. So basically, whichever row got selected. So now we'll be able to see exactly which task we're looking at, and once we've grabbed our cell, we can just say cell dot text label dot text equals current task dot name, and that will just take the name of the arc task, set it as the cell's text, and return it, which will drop it right in the view. Now, that's all great, but we should probably see if it actually works. So to do that, here in our view did load, let's actually create a task. We can call that default initializer that we created. Call it my first task. And it's not done. And we can say self.tasks add object task. And then because we're doing this kind of after the view loads, there's this kind of side effect that we have to do, which is we have to call reload data on our table view. And this is basically our responsibility to call as a data source. Whenever the contents of our table view change, the table view isn't just always checking to see if the stuff's changed. We actually need to tell it to go ahead and reload its data, which will call the various methods we just implemented. Alright, so let's see what happens when we run this. And I already know it's not going to work because I just remembered something. So we actually, as I suspected, see nothing. Here's probably the #1 thing that I, and maybe you too, always forget, is that once we've implemented this task list view controller class, we actually need to start using it. So we go ahead and click our view controller here that contains our task list. Select over here to see what kind of class it is. We'll see right now it's a UI table view controller. Well, that's all well and good, but we actually want to use the one we just wrote. So we'll start typing, it'll complete for us. RH task list view controller. Go ahead and save it. Let's now try running it. Hopefully it works this time. Hey, there we go. My first task. Now there's this funny thing where when we click on it, nothing really happens. Well, that's because we deleted that static cell. Now there's nothing connecting our list to our editing control. So what we actually need to do is, from our prototype cell, drag a new line down to our editing. That'll be a push. And you can see it already added this disclosure indicator again, but it didn't add it to the done table cell. This is because for each prototype cell you can actually have it direct to a different view controller, which is a great feature, but it means you actually have to connect this twice if you want to go to the same place. Alright, so we'll connect both of those. We have 2 pushes, but they're really doing the same thing. Alright, so let's see how this looks. Now we see that disclosure indicator, and it does indeed take us to the edit task screen. Wonderful. Alright, at this point, actually, you know what, we should probably make sure that our done style of table view cells work before we continue. So we'll go ahead and make one other task, a sample task. Call it done task. And we'll call it my first done task, and it will be completed this time. We'll add it to our tasks, and again, we just need to call this reload data once we're done changing data, just to notify the table view that it should do something. If we run it, well, nothing interesting happened. It doesn't look gray at all. And that's because we actually need to tell it here in our cell for row at index path that we want to use that type of cell. So let's define a second type of cell identifier. We'll call this one not done cell identifier. We'll call this one done cell identifier. And then right here, after we've found our current task, we'll say, we'll make a new variable, which will be a string called lowercase cell identifier. And actually, you can see these are uppercase. I think that's because they're static. I think that's the coding style Apple likes there. And we can actually use a cool little ternary operator here, or you can just use a regular if statement. We'll say current task.done ? So if current task is done, we want cell identifier to be done cell identifier. Otherwise, with a colon, we want it to be not done cell identifier. And then here, when we dequeue our cell, we'll just use lowercase cell identifier. And here, when we init one, if it doesn't exist, we'll again use our lowercase cell identifier. So, looks like I missed a semicolon there. Run this again, see what happens. Oh, there we go. Done looks done, and not done looks not done. So we're doing well. Alright, so the next big thing we probably need to do is be able to add these things. It's not terribly useful not to be able to do that. So here's our add task controller. Right now, and I'll run it again just so we can see. What we can do is we can type but the buttons don't do anything. So we will need to make another table view controller subclass. We'll call this one RH add task view controller. Same options as before, and it still is a UI table view controller subclass. Now, before we go any further with this, it's worth mentioning that while it does by default populate these methods that we're supposed to implement if we're doing true table view implementations, this will actually cause this funny side effect, and I think we'll be able to see it here. Oh, actually, I need to hook it up. Remember, it's the thing I forget, and hopefully you'll forget too, unless I'm crazy. Actually use the RH add task view controller here in our storyboard. So like I was saying, there's this funny thing that happens if we even have these empty implementations in our file, where hopefully we'll be able to see it here. It actually makes all the stuff in our table view disappear. That's because it sees that we are sort of claiming to know what sort of things and how many of them should belong in the table view. So it actually throws out all these static cells we made and lets us define it ourselves from the code, which is good that we can override that, but it actually means that whenever we generate one of these files, we actually need to delete a bunch of these empty implementations. So because we're not using any of the stuff in here, we'll actually delete all the way from right above the end here, all the way up to right under should auto-rotate to interface orientation, right below the pragma mark for data source. So makes our class quite a bit shorter. We should see that once we've deleted those, our controls should show up again. Yep, there they are. Alright, down to actually getting things to happen. We've got two buttons to click, so we'll make two IB actions. One will be for the cancel button. I'll call it pressed. And the other will be for the done button pressed. In addition, we will want to keep track of that text field. So we'll make an IB outlet for a UI text field. And that will be our main field. And we'll go drop these in with the synthesized name field. Down here we'll add a new pragma mark for our IB actions. And we'll implement cancel button and done button. And for right now in both of these, we'll just say self dismiss modal view controller animated. We'll say yes, that should be animated. This is a method that usually is called from the view controller that started the modal view controller, the one that popped up over everything. But actually as a convenience, you can call it from the thing that's been popped up. So you are dismissing yourself of sorts here. And we can see, actually go in here and hook these up. Can drag from these. And you can see you actually have to find in the hierarchy where it is. So I'm dragging here onto add task view controller. And I'll hook that up to cancel button pressed. And hook this one up to done button pressed. And we'll run it and see that we can actually use the app after we've entered the screen now, which is a huge feature. Not to get stuck in a screen. So cancel makes it go away, and you can see it nicely just slides back down, and done makes it go away. So far so good. What we really want to do is create a new task and add it to the list in the other view controller. That's actually significant. So what we really need to be able to do is sort of have a reference to the other view controller. And typically this really should be done with a delegate, but for the sake of this exercise we won't do that. Just know that in your projects, if you always have things referred directly to each other, it gets pretty nasty pretty quick, and you will find that your code gets very messy as you add more view controllers. So we will not actually suggest that, we'll just use it here. We won't actually import the header file, as that's not the sort of proper way to do it. We'll just define that there's a class called RHTaskListViewController. And that's so that if the imports change, nothing changes here, and it's just what everybody does, so we don't argue with it. So we'll give it another property called TaskListViewController. And we'll synthesize it as well. Alright, and then in our minds right now we'll just assume that thing magically gets set. I actually need to import it here in our implementation file, since we actually will be using its methods. Import its header file there. Now when the done button gets pressed, we can say that we will make a new task, RHTask, new task, and actually we need to import RHTask as well. So we'll make a new task, and that'll be with our default initializer. And for the name here, we'll actually say self.namefield.text, whatever's the name field at that time. And for done, we'll just say no. If you're making a new task, it's probably not done yet. Now we need to add this new task that we just created to our list of tasks. So we can say self.tasklistviewcontroller.tasks. We can actually access that list directly. We can just tell that to add object, new task. And again, this really should be done with delegates. You'd probably have a RHAddTaskViewController delegate that could that would have a callback for add object or task created. Again, this makes it a lot simpler for our example and really lets us focus on what we're trying to focus on, which is storyboards and table views. So this is wonderful, except we've got a couple of things missing. We never hooked up our name field, which would be a funny bug. Add task view controller. We actually just drag from the view controller here, click name field to hook that up, just like we do in our zip files. But the big problem is how on earth will this table view controller, this add task view controller, know who its list view controller is? Well, that's a good question. The way we actually do this with storyboards is through these segues. They're actually a little bit more than just connections here on the screen. They actually have some programmatic value too. If we click on one of them, we can see they actually have properties of their own too. Specifically this identifier, and that's what we'll actually be using. So we'll give this an identifier. We just make up a name just like our table cells. This identifier will be add task segue. Again, I stick segue at the end just so I know what it is. You can call it seriously whatever you want. And then that's great, but we actually need to respond to that. So in our task list view controller here, let's just pick a spot here. We are going to implement the prepare for segue method. And this is actually where we can do anything necessary to get ourselves ready for the segue that's about to happen. So we get passed in a segue here, and we get passed in a sender, which I think is just ourselves, so that's not that useful. So the way we respond to this is we make an if condition here. So we can say if segue dot identifier is equal to string, because this is how we compare strings, remember. And this is an add task segue. And now we can know for sure, this code will only get executed if we are conducting an add task segue, because we do actually have several segues. We can be drilling into a task, or we can be adding a new one, so we don't actually want to confuse them. So if this is the case that we are adding a new task, we can say that we are about to have an RH add task controller, which we need to import. Add task view controller. So we can say RH add task view controller, add task view controller, and we can actually just grab that right off the segue. It has it stored in it, and that is the destination view controller. So we say this is the target of the segue, so we can actually access it directly. We can say that add task view controller dot task list view controller, that property we just made, equals self. So this is how we hooked it up. Before the segue happens, this gets called, and we say, we're about to add a task, so this view controller has already been created, so we'll just access it and then give it a reference to ourselves, so that when it's done creating its task, it can actually add it to our list. And this works great. So let's run it, and I'll show you another sneaky bug that we're about to see. So when we click this button, you see a terrible, terrible crash probably. Yes, we do. So what could have gone wrong? Well, let's see. Unrecognized selector sent to instance. UI navigation controller set task list view controller. So it looks like we actually tried to set that new property we made, but not on our add task view controller, actually on our UI navigation controller. So why would that be the case? Oh, I see. Because when we do our segue, we actually are segueing to this navigation controller, which contains our add task view controller. And if you end up doing this in your own programs, and you need to use this navigation controller top bar with a table view controller, you will probably see the same bug. So what we actually need to do is, instead of assuming that is an RH add task view controller, we can assume that it is a UI navigation controller. We'll call that navcon for short, and that'll actually be what we get from our segue.destination view controller. And then our add task view controller is actually the root view controller of this navigation controller. So we can say navcon.viewControllers object at index 0. I think that's the easiest way to do it. So now we're actually grabbing the proper view controller, which is one layer deep. So let's see what happens. Add task, call that new task, click the done button, and nothing happened. This is because, in addition to actually creating the task, we need to, again, tell the table view to update itself. So here, right after we call dismiss modal view controller, we can say self.tasklistViewController.TableView. Because it's a table view controller, we can actually access this table view directly. Tell it to reload its data. We just made a change to its list, so it should go have another look at what's inside it. See if this works properly. Call it new task again. Done. Oh, and here we go. Try it again just to make sure that wasn't a fluke. And it does really work. So at this point, we have the ability to simply and easily add new tasks, so we can make sure that the cancel button does what it says it does. No tasks are added, so at this point we can add tasks. We're going to go ahead and call it for this lesson. We're getting a little bit closer to an hour, so I don't want to go too much further. The next lesson we'll be able to edit and add in those cool features like deleting and moving. So until next time.